Good evening and welcome to Be Informed. My name is Carl Buhariwala and I founded Be Informed to help people make good decisions. Today we're looking at the topic of leadership and we are joined by Suzie Thoraval, who'll be showing to us today a presentation about the Guide to Adaptive Stability. Just before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Today's session is being recorded and the session is taking place in Australia. And given the nature of the information being shared today, there aren't any sort of regulatory requirements that should be kept in mind, but the information in this session is general information only. And if we do have any specific queries about the contents of today's session, then please do speak to Suzie directly. Suzie is a leadership expert and will be taking us through some important information about leadership style and how you can sort of improve your approach, including some tips and traps to be mindful of. Just in terms of housekeeping, today's session will run for about 50 minutes. First, there'll be the seminar presented by Suzie for about 25 minutes, after which we'll then move into the Q&A part of the session. If you do have any questions, please send them through the chat function through to me and I'll relay them to Suzie. There's also a one-page handout that Suzie has kindly prepared. So that'll be shared with registered participants following the session. And the session is being recorded, so if you do have to drop out, you can watch the entire session on our YouTube channel following today's session. The information in this session is current as of today, and if you do wish to rely on it in the future, please do consult with a professional to ensure that it continues to apply in your circumstances. So with that in mind, I'll hand over to Suzie and we'll commence the seminar.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks for inviting me to be here. I'm delighted to chat with your audience about adaptive stability, which is a topic I'm really passionate about. Having been 25 years, the first part of that 25 years, about 14, 15 years as a corporate lawyer, and then the next sort of 13 years leading teams in large government and large and small, actually, government organizations. So I know what it's like to lead teams in high stakes environments, and adaptive stability is something that I've come to understand is really essential to any leader operating today. So let me talk to you about adaptive stability. Thanks, Carl. We'll go to the next slide. The first question is, why does it matter? And, you know, today's world is fast-paced, it's unpredictable, and there are really constant challenges for leaders. And it can feel like you're a bit like you're in the ocean, just being battered by relentless waves. And, you know, you just get hit by one and then you stand up and then the next one hits you. There's, you know, things like rapid technological changes, global interconnectedness, climate change, rising cyber threats, and that's just a handful of external pressures. But it means leaders have to adapt to these challenges, and they need to, what they used to do in the past won't necessarily work for them for these new challenges that are going to hit them. So they need to really balance innovation and risk management together. In other words, they've got to be simultaneously bold and also steady at the same time. And I just want to tell you a little story. In March 2020, I was running a division in a startup statutory authority in the Victorian government. And that statutory authority, my division started from, actually the authority started from nothing. And I was responsible, I built it up and I was responsible for a division and a team. And that division had legal, governance, risk, business continuity, communications, education. It had a whole range of things in it. Now, it was becoming apparent that there was this thing called COVID, and it might be, you know, something sort of big that organizations needed to respond to. And because we're a startup organization, it had been on my to-do list. I was responsible for business continuity. It had been on my to-do list to get a BC plan done. I hadn't actually done it yet when I got wind of COVID. So I spent about 16 hours one day just writing a BC policy and a procedure and a response. And then I really had to rapidly put that in place and get the team together when the next week it became apparent that, we had to send everyone home. And I led the crisis response. I had to keep my team at work okay and understanding what to do in terms of coming to not coming to the office actually, and working from home, and how all the technology worked, and how to really communicate in a new way online. I also had to continue to deliver the things that we were there to deliver. There were members of the public relying on this authority to actually deliver their services, so that couldn't sort of be down while we figured out what to do. And of course, I had two young children who were suddenly at home and being homeschooled. I didn't have an office, so I live in a townhouse with my family of four, and it wasn't working for me because I was in meetings all day to just be out in the open with everybody else. So I had to really adapt and find a rather large but still a cupboard to renovate. And renovate, when I say renovate, get everything out of and put a desk in and paint it, and make it sort of livable for me to do my work in. And I worked from there for 2 years. And I really had to keep operating under all those stresses, as we all did. I know we all got our stories around COVID, and keep going. And I actually got to the point of nearly burning out because I was trying to do everything, and I wasn't listening to that centre that was screaming out for a bit of well-being and a bit of self-care. And so I had to put in place some meditation in the evenings and weekends, where I actually just took some time to kind of decompress, and also find ways that we could still find joy in the family. And those were just a few little things, but it was a real wake-up call for me that my old method of just keep on going and no matter what, and relying, just thinking I could rely on myself forever without taking a break, was not going to work under those circumstances. And for all of us these days, even post-COVID, it feels like the world is just speeding up. Technology, computer power is just, going in leaps and bounds. There's Moore's law, which says, that technology doubles every 18 to 24 months. I think it's exceeded that now, and the rapid adoption of generative AI is one example. Information that we get is constant and it's immediate, and we're under public scrutiny in real time to respond appropriately to whatever happens as leaders. There's geopolitical issues that come up. I mean, just this week, US trade policies have made markets unstable, and there's a tariff war with China, and that could affect, us. In Australia, CEO confidence has plummeted, apparently. Consumer sentiments declined. Cyber risks are more real than ever, as I mentioned before. And there's, a growing social expectations of transparency, inclusion, and purpose-led leadership. So against that backdrop, no wonder leaders feel like there's a relentless workload and they can feel burned out. That staff are leaving, and that really costs. That speed to competency is about 6 months, so that really costs. There are unsustainable work practices. So you might respond to a crisis once, but you can't keep responding that way. Leaders don't feel like they have any time to innovate because they're just constantly in this treadmill. And resistance to change, even though change is constant, can be felt everywhere. Humans just don't like change as a rule, and that can lead to conflict among teams. And then secretly, leaders might feel like that constant uncertainty makes them lose sight of what am I actually here for, and what's the organisation's purpose again? Why do I come to work every day? They can have a lack of confidence that when new situations hit, or new technology, that they need to update their skills and they don't have time to do that. And then, they're balancing, they're still trying to deliver and they're still trying to foster trust in their teams. And all of that can be really overwhelming. So if I just go to the next slide, adaptive stability it gives leaders resilience, flexibility, and creativity that they need to really ride through those changes and feel okay internally, while they maintain their eyes on delivery. So this table here, is you actually read it from bottom to top. And if you look at it, in terms of, have a think as I'm talking through where you might be today. The first layer is at the bottom. That's you're in chaos, and your level of performance and confidence is less than zero. You're just really not performing. And the way to move through that, you need to focus on moving past that panic and calming that fight or flight mode so that you can open up to start to make a change. Then if you go up to level 2, you are sitting in overwhelm, which is slightly better than chaos, but you're still feeling overwhelmed and you're only really performing at about 5% in terms of confidence and performance. And what you need to do in that stage is really prioritize that self-care, as I did during, when COVID was really at its worst, and realizing that I actually needed to care for myself and put my own oxygen mask on before I could help anyone else. And then you move up into the third stage, which is that recognition of the stress and uncertainty that uncertainty brings. And the way that when leaders are at that stage, they're performing around 20%. They're probably confident around 20%. And what they need to focus on there is really building sustainable practices. They need to accept some feedback and really actively listen to that feedback and take it on board and think about what they can learn, and think about how they can adapt to future situations. When you're moving up then into responsive, you might be able to respond to situations that happen, particularly if you've experienced them in the past, but you still might at that level be surprised by new situations that past experience doesn't really fit into. And what you need to do in that level is to think about your own mindset and understand what your own vision and your values, and keep continuously learning and practicing adaptation. And then you're starting to move into that level 5, which is confidence, handling new challenges that come up. You're using emotional intelligence, you're using time management really well, and there's some great tools around for effective time management for leaders. And you're willing to take some calculated risks. And that, if you focus on at that stage being adaptive and really communicating effectively with your team, trusting your intuition, and improvising when things, to just see, trusting your gut and improvise and see if something's working. Then you can really get into that where we want to be, which is that 100% adaptive stability, confidence, and performance. You've reserved your capacity. Actually, the focus, what you want at that stage is to consistently lead in that way with adaptive stability, no matter what happens. So you've reserved that capacity to handle the unexpected. You're fostering continuous learning and trust in your team. You're encouraging proactive problem solving. And you've got the resilience, the mindset, and the flexibility, which helps you stay calm and maintain balance no matter what happens. So where are you on this ladder, given where I've, the explanation that I've given you? And I'd be willing to bet that it's somewhere along the way. If you're at level 6, congratulations, and I'd love to hear your stories and your methods. If you're at any other layer, adaptive stability can really help you. And even when you're at level 6, maintenance and consistency and keeping this in the front of your mind will really help you. So if I move on to the adaptive stability model, which I've developed, and this is really informed by my risk management and my legal background, as well as what I've learned as a leader that helps you deal with that uncertainty in high stakes environments. It's allowing you to stay strong, focused, and resilient while adjusting to change instead of constantly putting out fires. So you can see the 3 main circles in the Venn diagram. There's mindset and responsive. How do you respond to change? Are you open to learning? And are you focusing on what you can control? Then there's flexibility, which is to allow you to shift when you're needed, to activate the plans that you might have put in place, preparing for uncertainty. And then are you experimenting and innovating and just continuously learning? And then that 3rd circle in this Venn diagram is resilience, because you can't actually run on an empty tank. And if your phone's at a level 1% battery life, you'd plug it in and you would recharge it. And the same works for leaders. What are your practices to maintain that resilience and be able to bounce back so you can move forward? And then in the middle, so that gives you adaptive stability right in the middle of that circle, the Venn diagram. And then there's the intersection between, if you've got mindset and flexibility, you've got agile performance, which is you're adapting quickly, you're making swift decisions, you're adjusting as you go and staying ahead of dynamic environments. And you're applying adaptability so that you can prepare for unknown challenges. And then in between flexibility and resilience is that continuous growth mindset where you're fostering a learning oriented culture, you're learning from setbacks, you're encouraging risk taking, which is considered, and using risk appetite of the organization. And you're making it okay to fail. You're empathizing with the team, you're adopting diverse perspectives, and you're maintaining clear communication. And then that intersection between resilience and mindset is where calm confidence sits. So you've got that internal strength and your tools to handle uncertainties. You can analyze risks and benefits of doing things, and you earn the team's trust. And then around the model, around the edge, which sort of encapsulates the whole Venn diagram, you've got foresight at the top between mindset and flexibility, which is that anticipation and preparing proactively for what might come. You've got equilibrium, which is that balance between traditions and your long-term goals, and then innovation and needing to pivot when situations occur. And then around the other side, you've got that sustainability between resilience and mindset, where long-term planning sits, and vision, having the vision and making decisions based on your values and your vision. So that's really the adaptive stability model. And I want you to think about it like being an oak tree in a storm. And if you think about your leadership as an oak tree in a storm, you've got those roots deep in the ground, and the storm's hitting you, and it might be swaying your branches, and your branches aren't rigid, they're swaying in the wind and with the storm, but you have that firm root in the ground. Your leadership is rooted and in a stable earth, so that when the storm passes, you can assess where you are. You probably will have some new growth if the rain has tilled your gone on your fertile soil, and you've learned from that storm next time. So if I just drill down a little bit further into mindset, flexibility, and resilience in the next slide, thanks, Carl. There are really, as I said, the three main circles are mindset, flexibility, and resilience. So mindset is embracing change as an opportunity for growth. In your mindset, you're developing an awareness of your strengths, of your weaknesses, of your values, of your goals, so that you can really make aligned decisions. You're staying curious and open-minded. You're seeking diverse perspectives, and you're having a positive outlook and self-belief as well. You're ready to learn and you're ready to innovate. And then in the flexibility, you're adjusting to changing circumstances. So you're letting go of rigid expectations of yourself and also of your team and your organization. You've got fluidity and you're responsive. You're staying agile, you're continuously learning, and you're updating your skills. And then in resilience, you've got the coping mechanisms in place before uncertainty hits and you're in a panic like I was during COVID. So you can recover from setbacks. You also celebrate small wins so that you've got that dopamine that and endorphins that, you know, when you have a little celebration of a small win, and that boosts you to keep having wins in the future. You're maintaining your inner strength. You're prioritizing your own well-being. So the key, you know, sleep, diet, exercise, all of those things. And you're using mindfulness to stay grounded. I can't tell you how much that helped me during that COVID situation. And it helps you make better decisions as well. And you're reaching out to a supportive network and cultivating that supportive network around you. And that can be friends and family, work colleagues, and it can also be mentors or coaches. They can help enormously as sounding boards for the decisions that you have to make as a leader. So if you've got that flexibility in your approach and your stable leadership presence, you can really trust that you can handle what comes your way. And a couple of leaders that I find inspiring and that I think embody this approach. One is Jacinda Ardern, who's no longer the Prime Minister of New Zealand, but she dealt with multiple crises at once or very soon after each other. There was the Christchurch mosque shootings, there was the White Island volcano eruption, and then, of course, COVID. And she just kept communicating with transparency and emotional intelligence. She balanced strong, swift decisions, but with empathy and care and for people's well-being. And the other leader that I find inspirational is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a Supreme Court justice in the US. She's died now, but when she was a young lawyer, I mean, she was one of very few women that were in Harvard Law School in, I think it was the 50s. And then over the course of her career through the 60s and 70s, she advocated strongly for gender equality across shifting political and legal landscapes. And when she became a Supreme Court justice, her dissents were really powerful, and there were moral anchors that influenced long-term public thinking on gender. And she balanced fierce intellect with quiet perspectives, even though there was public pressure to conform. So those are two leaders that I find really highly inspirational that I think embody adaptive stability. So if we go just to the next slide, thank you. Really, I just wanted to finish, you know, we've talked about flexibility, mindset, resilience. We've talked about the pathways and the kinds of things that you might do to achieve adaptive stability. And during COVID, we all did what we needed to do, me included, to manage the disruption. But what did that cost us? I think many leaders are really weary at the thought of continuing to face similar crises and disruptions. So I want you to just ask yourself these questions. Do your leaders have the mindset and the tools to manage uncertainty? If not, what do they need? where are they on that ladder of adaptive stability? How flexible are your leaders and your teams in the face of changing circumstances? Do they fear change and want to stay rigid and try to go back to how things were? Or are they flexible? How well do your leaders and your teams bounce back from setbacks if they've had a setback? Do they pick themselves up and keep going and ask what did they learn even at the end of a project? Do they do lessons learned and really try to learn from those lessons and not repeat the mistakes or the things that the challenges? And is your organization maximizing opportunities that come from uncertainty? Because sometimes uncertainty is actually an opportunity to do things differently and think differently and improve things and create efficiencies. So just to finish off with my favorite quote from Vivian Green, who said, "Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's actually about learning to dance in the rain." And that's what adaptive stability really calls upon you to do. So that's what I had to talk to you about today, and that's how I really help coach teams and leaders. The method I use. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, Suzie. It was a very insightful presentation, and hope those that have joined have taken something away from that. Suzie's details are on screen, so if you do have any specific queries you would like to raise, please do get in contact with Suzie. Today's session is being recorded, so if you have joined late, you can watch the entire session on our YouTube channel following the closure of today's session. And as a reminder, there's a one-page handout that Suzie has kindly prepared, which I'll be sending through to registered participants following today's session. So Suzie will now jump into the Q&A component of the session. And we'll just start off with the first question, which is around that ladder you showed, right? And I think you've asked the audience to sort of consider, where they might fit. What sort of, I guess, if you could just maybe summarize maybe, a few questions that people can answer to then help sort of determine where they fit on that ladder. Sort of how would they go about thinking about which questions to answer so they can then determine where they sit on that ladder?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I suppose it's really the activity column. I don't know if you want to go back to the ladder so that we can
I'll go
speak to
back to
it.
that slide.
Yeah, that one. The activity, you look at the activity column and you ask yourself, day to day, where am I actually in that activity column? Am I feeling total? It's about a feeling, internal feeling. Am I feeling totally in chaos, or am I feeling overwhelmed? Do I know I need to change? And do I have an awareness and insight into the uncertainty that I'm having to manage? Or can I actually respond when I know what, I've come up against a situation that I've encountered before. I know what to do, but then if something new happens, I'm really nervous. And so it's about asking yourself where you are and how you're feeling, which determines, where you might be in the ladder. And leaders I work with typically sit around the 3 or 4 mark, I find. So they've got it, they're not necessarily in total chaos. Maybe their teams are, and they're having to try and find a way to, coach them. But mainly they recognize that stress that they're feeling is about uncertainty and that constant change. They're not quite sure how to calm the whirlwind and get off the merry-go-round for long enough to ask themselves some questions about what they need to do. So I don't know if that helps, but yeah, it's really about focusing on where am I in that activity.
Yeah.
And then the focus column really tells you what you need to do next to get yourself up the ladder into the next stage. And you cannot go from 1 to 6 immediately. It's a journey. It's always a journey. And you should be kind to yourself no matter where you are in that journey, because at least you're on a journey and you recognize that you need that help.
And what feedback, Suzie, can the leaders obtain, or invite, so that they can then help, assess where they are as well on that ladder? Like, is it a purely internal, discussion that they have with themselves through reflection, or should they invite feedback from their team or their, leaders above to then help determine the positioning as well?
Great question, Carl. I believe feedback's a gift. It's not that easy to receive it. And, typically our mind, I think it's if we get, um, you know, 3 compliments, just getting one, semi-negative piece of feedback cancels out the 3 compliments. You no longer hear anything good, you just hear that feedback. And I suppose um, I think you should ask your team, how am I doing? And make it safe for them to actually give you an answer that's true rather than them. I've been in situations where leaders ask for feedback, but you know that they're not actually open to hearing criticism. So you just sort of play the game. So making it safe for your team, and the way you might want to do that is like an anonymous, I don't know, feedback box or some way of anonymously asking them for feedback. If you built trust in your team, then they should feel comfortable to give you feedback. That would be the ideal, that they're actually saying, hey, these things are not working for me, and I really need you to act a little differently. So if you've got that trust and dialogue, a trust is built over time. So to start with, just making it safe, getting that feedback from your team anonymously might be a way to get that feedback. Certainly from your leaders, seeking feedback. Don't just wait for your performance conversation. Seek that feedback, and not in a needy way, but in a way that you're saying, I'd like to really be on that continuous improvement journey and improve my leadership skills. And also trusted mentors and advisors can also give you feedback, is another good way of getting that feedback and insight into where you are. You can ask your family. They're often your harshest, give you the harshest feedback. So that's another way. Your friends and family, you can ask them, although friends and family tend to want to say nice things to you to make you feel good. So I suppose that's just one input into where I might be. But absolutely seek feedback, and then when you receive it, just sort of pause. If it's constructive, what we say constructive, or let's say negative, try not to ruminate on the negative feedback and how that feels and keep experiencing that negativity over and over. Ask yourself what you can learn from it, and then try and put in place some improvements to help you. So that would be my advice around feedback. But I think absolutely don't just ask yourself, although asking yourself the questions can be quite insightful also, so don't forget that. Journaling and just making sure that you're taking the time to ask yourself those questions, maybe even
Yeah.
reviewing feedback that you might have. I actually used to like keeping a folder of feedback from stakeholders, and because you might be in the hurly burly of the day, and so just putting it in a folder as it comes through, and then taking the time to take stock and review it can really help give you some insight. As to where you are.
Cool. I think that's a great sort of conversation we just had about feedback, and I think, Suzie, this leads to the next question, which relates to, of course, your model, but on mindset, the importance of reflection, right? I think you mentioned that as well. Like, how do we calibrate what the mindset is unless we actually, reflect on where we are, right? So, are there any tips that you have to sort of help people? That's sort of the starting point of the model. If we look at it, on this space here,
Yeah.
what sort of pointers can people see thinking about to help them calibrate where their mindset is at, so that they can start moving through that model on screen.
Yeah, I would say it's really easy to have your day be hijacked by the important and urgent things that are on your, in your email or on your to-do list. But if you don't make time each week to just get off the dance floor, as you've probably heard that metaphor, and onto the balcony and just take a step back from that day to day, and carve out time for that strategic thinking, then it's very difficult to develop and have a insight into your own mindset. So that's the first thing I would say, is carve out time so that you can reflect on where you're at in your mindset. Um, and then there are lots of exercises you can do around what your own strengths are. And some of those can come from feedback, other people telling you what your strengths are, but also can come from your own insight. And the things you like to do as well. For years and years as a lawyer, I didn't realize that I don't love the technical and data and real detailed work that a lawyer has to do. And so I'm trained in it, but doesn't light me up. So, having that self-awareness can really help direct you to be the leader that you can be. And then doing a values exercise. What are my values? I would say give yourself 3 minutes, sketch out 10 values, and then order them in order, and keep your top three really in the front of your mind. And I actually have my values on my wall, and I look at them all the time. And when a decision comes up, I think to myself, does that align with my values, or is it something that I could do but actually is outside of my values? And again, as a lawyer in corporate law firm, helping uh, shareholders make more money didn't align with my values. And so when I went to government, it really spoke much more to my sense of wanting to serve and help people and improve lives. And so those things, that awareness is really important. And then, yeah, I think those are the main things. And what helps you be still and quiet. So little things like going for a walk at lunchtime, leaving the desk, don't eat at the desk, or eat at the desk but then go for a walk, and being in nature and just noticing, birds and trees, and emptying your mind. Don't sit and scroll on social media all lunchtime. Get out and just clear it away. That can really help with your mindset as well. So those are just a few little tips I would say that help you to really take the time to know yourself. Because the more you know yourself, the more you're going to be able to know what to put in place when uncertainty hits you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just transition back to the ladder again. We just got a question. Just if you can just remind us, Suzie, on on 5 and 6, adaptive and consistency in the focus column.
Yep.
What just maybe are the key differences between those two terms?
Yeah, I suppose adaptive, so you're learning to adapt, you're practicing adaptive at level 5. So you can do it when uncertainty hits, you're getting your team to think outside the square and brainstorm, and one idea is building on another and building on another. And that worked that time. So you'll try it again the next time. But you still at level 5 might encounter a situation where it's difficult to be adaptive, or you actually do fall in a heap because you weren't expecting something that then happens. Whereas level 6, you're really very consistently able to respond to uncertainty when it occurs. And part of that, as I said, reserving capacity. So your diary's not chock full every day, every week. You've got the space. You're making time to learn, we're all having to learn, what does generative AI mean for us? If you just hide under the doona and don't think about that, as someone like my dad, he's a different generation, but um, doesn't want to learn about any of that stuff, although it's not that he's not a curious person. But you know, you need to just keep learning and keep, you know, it's a continuous cycle. You can't just rest on your laurels when you're at level 6. It's a continuous practice, and you know, proactive problem solving and really learning, and yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so Susie, just on that second part to then that question is around, do people always stay, they might start at level 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 and move up, hopefully, right?
Yeah,
But if people do reach a certain level, do they move down and up, depending on the nature of the circumstances, or do you think that,
absolutely.
yeah, it will be dynamic, wouldn't it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
You can find yourself, and as particularly, you know, let's say, like for me, running is part of my, you know, helping me center myself. But let's say I got an injury and I couldn't run for a while. My ability then to be resilient in the face of whatever's coming at me would be diminished, and that's a sort of a situation that's kind of happened to me. It's not like I, you know, got injured on purpose, but it can make me then forget sometimes about my coping mechanisms, and that can happen to leaders. You know, I don't know, something really awful happens to them and throws them off their balance. So yeah, absolutely, it's dynamic, and that's why maintaining focus on that continuous practice of adaptive stability is the best way to go, and
mm,
keeping it in the forefront of your mind.
yeah. And Susie, you touched on this point at the start of your presentation in relation to just the circumstances that we are in. You know, since COVID, there's been so much change. The pace at which we all work is, really accelerated. Um, One person has asked in relation to, their position, business might have, constant setbacks or challenges that they had to go through. What sort of initial sort of pointers would you give to that individual to help them sort of think about how they can move toward adaptive stability? If they're in that situation where they've constantly seen blockers or, faced feedback where they're not performing well, or it might just be the circumstances that they're in, what sort of encouragement would you give to those individuals to help get them back onto this journey?
Yeah, I think one of the things that springs to my mind when you talk about that scenario is to focus on what you can control. And you know, things, because those you know, the organizations making changes, or I don't know, Trump's doing something weird any given day that could happen, um, and that has an impact on you, and you can't control any of that. So if you think about what you can control as a kind of core circle, um, I would say looking inward, and the one thing I can control is how I respond to what is coming at me. And you might, there's another circle on the next layer, which is something you can influence. You might be able to talk to your boss, you might be able to talk to your teammates, you might be able to, you know, get some help, or influence the situation. And then there's the outer layer, which is, you know, I've just got no control over it. And that stuff you just need to accept, really. So I would say, if you're in that situation where you feel like that is constantly, there are sort of negative things happening to you, focus on what you can control. Um, when you perceive a situation has happened to you that's negative, really think about what you can learn from that. And I've just used it's a kind of a simple metaphor, but imagine you're driving somewhere to a meeting, and you've got your route, the GPS has given you your route, but then you know, there's roadworks where you wanted to go where the GPS is telling you to go, and you can't, you literally stopped by a sign, and some men with, you know, stop signs saying you can't go this way, so you have to take the detour. So you have to, that's that flexibility, you have to just sort of go the alternate route. But on the alternate route, you might notice there's a cafe that you didn't know existed before, that you might want to try, and it has, you know, I don't know, world's best coffee on the window or something, and you're a coffee connoisseur or something like that. So sometimes with these negative situations, if you can reframe them as what can I learn, but also where's the opportunity here that I'm, maybe if you can try and look at it that way, that can help you.
Mm. Thanks, Suzie. Now, this leads to sort of our final question. I'll just go back to that slide here, which you had about asking yourself some questions. On the first one there, one person has asked, do you have any more examples about, what tools people can sort of leverage to manage uncertainty, whether that be soft or hard tools, I guess. Do you have any other examples that you could sort of share with the group?
Yeah, I mean, I can't go past having been a former head of risk. I can't go past doing some risk management, which is, I suppose you'd call a hard tool. But thinking about what are your goals and then what might stop you from achieving your goals. And that can be people think risk management's boring, but it can actually be a really useful exercise to go through. And quite cathartic when you think about, okay, well, what might stop me from achieving my goals? What am I currently doing about that? And is that enough? And then what else could I do about it to make sure that I'm getting to my destination? So I'd say that's one to help manage uncertainty. Thinking about what you would do in various situations if they arose, rehearsing for them could be another way to do that, to manage uncertainty. And I really think perspective is a huge tool, so that you're not bracing every time and rigid when something uncertain happens. You just absorbing it and thinking to yourself, okay, well, what can I learn from this, and how do I need to pivot? So I love the getting the team together when something uncertain's happened, being really communicative with the team so that you're acknowledging their disruption and how they're feeling about that disruption, and then getting the team together and getting them to help you figure out how to respond to that change. And sometimes the best ideas can actually come from your team. You don't, as a leader, you don't have all the answers. And if you've built a diverse team with different skill sets and different ways of thinking, then that team exercise of brainstorming ideas about how you're going to respond to uncertainty can be highly valuable. And it's so you come up with a solution that sort of helps you deal with the uncertainty, but it also has the added bonus of the team feels ownership, they feel consulted, they feel like they've got agency, and they've had a say in how you're going to respond. So if you can, I think that's a fabulous way to really manage uncertainty.
Thank you, Suzie. You raised some good points there around risk management and having foresight, perspective, communication. I think the foresight is a really key one, isn't it, right? Because if you actually can plan ahead and think about it in advance, then you can sort of prepare yourself for what's to come, right?
Yeah, you can do your best. I mean,
mm,
something like cyber security, it's not if, it's when. And you can have all the patching and all the things, in place, and it still happens to you. So having that plan of how you're going to recover is also some uncertainties you just have to live with.
spot on.
But as much as you can, being able to think about risks and put mitigations, what in risk speak you would call mitigations, or the things I'm going to do to stop that uncertainty from occurring, can really help you and make you feel like, well, I've done everything I can, and if it happens, I'm ready.
That's right. Because yeah, you're right. Cyber's now just a given. Threats, resilience, it's all part and parcel of doing any business really, or even just engaging on even through this forum today or online, you sort of got to face those threats regardless. So
Yeah, and when I sit on audit and risk committees, I mean, you would want to see cyber risk as something that the organisation has contemplated and is on their radar, is in their sort of risk universe of things that could go wrong. And you want to see that the controls, of as many controls as they can put in place, are there, but ultimately it's one that you just have to live with. And you want to make sure that your CEO is ready to respond and not delaying, 5 days before they go out to the media to speak about it. Are the speaking notes already ready to go? Is the CEO media trained so that they can go out and reassure the public, or whatever you need to do? So, yeah, we're getting into a more technical risk conversation, but it is a part of it's definitely informed my approach to leadership, is to think about those uncertainties and try and put things in place so that you can handle whatever comes your way.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Suzie. That brings us to the end of the formal part of the session today. I'll just share Suzie's details again. So if you have any queries, please do not hesitate to reach out to her.
Yeah, I'd love to have a chat. You can have a discovery call with me to see if I might be able to help you, and I do publish a newsletter as well if you'd like to be on that list.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining today. This brings us to the end of the session. As I've mentioned before, this session has been recorded, so if you have joined late, you can watch the entire session on our YouTube channel following today's session, and there'll be a one-page handout that I'll share with registered participants, so you can have that handy and keep it by your side and share it with family, friends, and just keep going on your leadership enhancement journey. Please do follow us on social media if you have enjoyed today's session, and can continue to sort of help us promote the great sort of information that we are providing you today with those that might be interested in learning about it. So that brings us to the end now, and thank you, Suzie, for your time.
Thanks, Carl.
And
it's a pleasure.
hopefully those join today or will listen online later on YouTube will have gained something and can then progress with their journeys. All right, that brings us to the end. So thank you so much for joining, and bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.